Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So we can be letting people in kind of for probably the next few minutes. We'll have some.
Police officer step up someone's neck and we go out into the street. Why weren't you holding us while things were still lawful? The only way to sort of, I think a lot of people believe.
Okay.
We're just giving it another minute in case anyone is dropping in a minute or two late, and then we'll get started. All right, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. We might have a few people kind of trickling in as we get going, but we'll make sure that they get caught up. My name is Emma Banks. I see some familiar faces on here, so some of you may be familiar. I'm the Secondary Digital Learning and Computer Science Specialist at the Department of Education. And here co-hosting with me today is John, and I will let him introduce himself before we get going today.
I'm John Graham. I'm the Elementary Digital Learning Specialist.
Awesome, thanks, John.
Yeah.
So today we're going to launch into Remote Learning 101, Module 1, Part 2. Yesterday we kind of went over the getting set up for remote learning, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about getting started, kind of specifically talking about online safety and digital citizenship. Oh, I am way off of my slides. One moment. Here we go. That's the right one. Part 2 is underlined now, not part 1. We did part 1 yesterday. I felt like it was deja vu for a minute. Yeah, so today we're going to talk a little bit about online safety and digital citizenship and how you can kind of scaffold that into your classroom structure when you're getting set up, when you're kind of thinking about your design for remote learning. Yesterday we kind of talked about creating a distance or remote learning plan. So this is kind of going to build on that and talk a little bit about how you might incorporate online safety and digital citizenship into some of that. So I want to just start with online safety because I feel like it's a little bit more of a quick and easy concept. Online safety is defined by common sense education as knowing about one's internet privacy and how one's behaviors can support a healthy interaction with the use of the internet. So it's not just staying safe and protecting yourself. It's also, having a healthy interaction and engagement so that you're not having negative experiences when you're communicating with people online, interacting, all of those sorts of things. I will mention we are going to be sharing out this PowerPoint. For anyone who was here yesterday, you'll kind of know I'll take the registration list and send out this PowerPoint with some helpful links at the end. So you will have access to all of these things. These are going to be some resources that we'll talk a little bit about, and then so don't worry about trying to write down links or anything like that because you'll get this PowerPoint via email after our session. So one of the ways that I like to frame online safety is by using the 9 key Ps. And if you're not familiar with them, this link right here is an article that kind of talks about what they all are, the top one here. And then I just kind of want to go through some of them and what they kind of stand for and how you might consider them moving forward. So starting with passwords, These are the kinds of things that you and your students should be kind of keeping in mind. Are you creating secure passwords? Are you using a different password depending on what you're doing? You don't want to use all one password for everything, because then if somebody has one password, they have all your passwords. That is kind of one of the, I would say, foundational things about protecting yourself online, is it kind of starts with your passwords. You don't want to, I've heard of people having like an Excel sheet with all of their logins and all of their passwords, and that's definitely not a best practice, because if somebody has that spreadsheet, then they have access to all of your things. Personal information, it's kind of like your family members, where you live, things like that. You only want to share those with certain audiences, depending on, or be conscious of where you're sharing them and who you're sharing them with. You may not necessarily want to put your house address, public on Facebook, but, talking about what your favorite food is, wouldn't necessarily be able to identify who you are. So just keeping in mind, like, what kind of personal information you're sharing, where you're sharing it, and who might be able to have access to that. Private information, this is stuff that you could use to actually find a person. So their email address, their physical address, their phone number. These things are things that you want to kind of hold more closely. I just use the example of like your favorite food, like that's personal information, but it's not necessarily private information. So kind of knowing the difference between those two and which one you should hold more tightly to and be more free with sharing, it can be really helpful. Photographs seems to be a big one since we have started this kind of emergency remote learning. I think a lot of people weren't necessarily prepared for all the photos of Zoom that have ended up on Facebook with all the little photos of students. So some of those things may not come as a thought to your mind on the top, but when you start to think about, being safe online, you want to consider who are in the photos. Are there private details in the background of the photo? I like to use the example of a license plate. A lot of people will post pictures of a vehicle. Does the vehicle have the license plate? And if it does, then you've officially posted kind of private information or personal information in a photograph, so somebody could actually grab that and do something with it. Another component of photographs is that with facial recognition tools, you could post a photo and have a facial recognition software be able to pick out a photo, pick out a face, and be able to identify other photos that person is in as well. If you have Facebook, or if you used to have MySpace or anything like that, you can kind of see some of those, be like, do you know this person? And it's like, oh, how did you know that I knew them? And then they were able to look at pictures of you and your friends. That's something that I believe they turned off by default now, but it used to be on. So I think a lot of people used to get that. Next is property, kind of understanding what rights, what work is copyrighted, what work is free to reuse, free to modify. In the digital realm, understanding personal property rights is really important. It's kind of that idea of when you have when you have an essay that somebody wrote in your hand, it's a little bit harder to just be like, here you go, here's this thing that somebody else made. But when you're online, it's much easier to pass something off as your own, even inadvertently, without giving it credit. So anytime that you can provide citations or sources to kind of let people know where you got your information from, and you don't want to reuse copyrighted work without attributing who it's to. One of the best ways to mitigate and avoid all of that would be to use things that are licensed under Creative Commons. Those are all free to use. Most of them they're either free to use with modification or free to just use the way it is. So if you're looking to modify something, you might want to kind of do some searching on that. Google does offer some advanced search tools that will let you search by usage rights. But I strongly urge you to follow the links that you get as results from them, because it's not a fail-safe way to search. So you kind of want to make sure, like, double check Google. Like, if they tell you something is copyright free, go to the source and see if it has a copyright on it, because sometimes Google sources will give you stuff that is copyright and say it's not. Okay, so permission. Do students know how to get permission for the work they use? I kind of talked about that a little bit. Do they know how to cite sources? Do they know how to give credit? Do they know when they need to cite and give credit? Do they understand, you know, how many words you can use without quoting something, or when quotes are necessary, things of that nature. And then we get into kind of like the protection. Do they understand the risks in clicking on any hyperlink? You know, that some of these things are phishing, and that there's malware or viruses or ransomware, or they're trying to steal your identity or collect personal information from you for, you know, a whole number of reasons. So I always like to call it click happy, trying to, you know, educate students that, you know, don't, just because it's a flashy link, you know, don't click on it. That whole idea, like, oh, it's a free car, all you have to do is give us your bank account information, you know, like those kinds of things you just want to stay far away from. If it seems too good to be true, it definitely is. I think anytime we can kind of let our students know not to get click happy, that's great. Which thankfully on a lot of the school computers, they do have the filtering on them. So in theory, some of that would get filtered out, but having an awareness of that, I think, is extremely important. Okay, so protection. Oh, I just said that. Sorry, guys. Professionalism. Do students understand that they need to conduct themselves online in a professional manner? Do they understand that you can't use acronyms, you know, when you're writing an essay, that even so you're typing, you still need to like write out sentences. This isn't text messaging. You know, the professionalism of engaging in learning can be really, it can help to empower students and kind of show them that, you know, there's these things like netiquette and, you know, keeping global awareness, things of that nature can really help if you are focusing on professionalism. And then my personal favorite is personal brand, because I hear from a lot of people, oh, I want to keep all of my information off the internet. I don't want a presence. I don't want to be present online. That's why, you know, I don't have a Facebook account, because I don't want people to be able to, you know, have my information. Those kinds of things. That is kind of an outdated ideal. If you do a Google search on your name, chances are you will find something about yourself. You really give yourself and your students empowerment of their own identity by encouraging them to develop their own personal brand. So the idea that if you don't create your brand, that somebody could come in and do that for you. There's a lot of businesses that will they try to build up their reputation online, so that if they ever had somebody come on and try to smear their business or something like that, you know, say that they're an awful business, they have all this other stuff that was already online that shows that that one fact is not true. So anytime that you can kind of put things that are that represent the trueness of yourself and your professionalism, those kinds of things, then you help to mitigate any type of slander that could happen, I guess is the best word that I can think of for that. So those are kind of like the 9 things to keep in mind when you're talking about online safety. You will notice that there is a theme of 9 in this presentation. This is the first one. So the 9 key Ps are, I feel, 1, they're a great conversation starter, because students they pick up on this pretty easily. So just kind of talking to your students about the 9 key Ps and thinking about how those might translate into what you're doing and what they're doing, both in the classroom and just in their daily lives. And then there's 3 resources here. This one just kind of talks about these key Ps and how they relate to the classroom. Then we have Common Sense has a resource about internet safety, kind of specifically talking a little bit about data on who is a target online. It can be a little bit frightening, because you'll realize that a lot of teenagers are a prime target for phishing and scams in that nature. So that article is really interesting, because it provides a different perspective on online safety. And then I also included the MDOE page that has a lot of information on connectivity, online safety, digital citizenship, all of those kinds of things. So that's a really great resource as well. And again, we will be sharing out this PowerPoint, so you will get all of those links. All right, so next page. Okay, so now I want to get into digital citizenship a little bit. And I find it helpful to frame the conversation about digital citizenship by just talking about what citizenship is. And so Merriam-Webster defines citizenship as membership in a community and the quality of an individual's response to membership in a community. So it's not just about being a part of the community, but it's also about how you respond to being a part of that community. I think that can help frame some conversations about cyberbullying and things of that nature, because you are framing it at this higher level. You know, I think most of us know and understand the concept of citizenship. So I think that if we start there and then we move into digital citizenship, it could be a much easier reach than to try to just start with digital citizenship, because it's not unique in and of itself. It's a concept that has very much existed for a long time. We're just in a different world at that point. We're in a digital world versus a face-to-face world. And hopefully, I think you can see this well. I know that these are kind of small, but I'm going to talk about this. This is a 9 again. These are the 9 elements of digital citizenship. And I find it helpful to pair the 9 key Ps with the 9 elements of digital citizenship, because then you've got your 9 and 9, and you can kind of keep that in mind as you're moving forward. I don't know about you, but I find those types of like helpful memory joggers, like, oh, those 9, that's right, those 9 things. What was that again? Then I have an easier time finding it. Okay, so the 9 elements of digital citizenship are access, commerce, communication, law, literacy, security, etiquette, rights and responsibilities, and health and wellness. Now, one of these is probably extremely familiar to you, or more familiar to you than some of these others, and that's this digital literacy piece. That's why it's kind of in the middle, because digital literacy is often confused as digital citizenship, but they are not the same thing. Digital literacy is a component of the bigger piece of digital citizenship. Digital literacy is extremely important, and it might be almost the most important facet of digital citizenship, but I wanted to just emphasize that digital literacy and digital citizenship are not the exact same thing. They're a little bit different. And so access would be the full electronic participation in society. Do students have access to their learning? Do they have the ability to connect? Do they have access to the learning materials? Do they have access to your LMS? Do they need accommodations to be able to access materials? You know, do you have students who might have a disability in your class and might need those types of accommodations? Those kinds of things are good to think about. Commerce doesn't necessarily apply as much to your students, except for just educating them about how you would exchange money online. Buying and selling, how that works, the different ethics that are involved in that. You know, you don't want to put something on eBay that is broken and junk and sell it for $500, because the next thing you know, you get a bad review on eBay, and that was not a best practice for digital citizenship. You know, a lot of these things can translate, because, you know, you wouldn't sell something on, you know, Craigslist or Facebook. Well, I mean, maybe you would, but probably, hopefully not. That was, you know, kind of junk and put a high price on it. So I think that some of those things can kind of translate back and forth. But kind of just bringing awareness to the buying and selling online, and how to be, 1, secure with that, and 2, be clear with communication on that. And then communication would be kind of the obvious. It's the exchange of information online. How are your students communicating with you? Are they communicating effectively? Do they know what their expectations are surrounding communication? Going back to the online safety kind of talk about, you know, are they being professional? Are they being professional students when they're engaging with their classroom? That can be a bigger piece of this digital citizenship, I think, with students, is the communication piece. That's where the cyberbullying falls in. That's where, you know, all of those different, the ongoings of the classroom, I think, fit usually into that communication piece. Law, I think one of the biggest things with that for our students is just understanding that copyright comes with consequences. You know, if you're using copyrighted material, I think YouTube is a really great example, because YouTube won't even let you put like a 15-second clip of a copyrighted song without flagging your video. They have some pretty strict copyright filters. So just kind of understanding what the laws and the responsibilities and the consequences could be surrounding that. Just like we might talk to our students about plagiarism, this is very similar to that. This is just in a digital world. Plagiarism and that whole conversation about academic integrity becomes even more important in a digital world, because we have other, like if you're not housed in your classroom, you have others who can see some of that stuff. And so being conscious of copyright and things of that nature, the laws and the responsibilities that surround that, is really important. Going back to digital literacy, the process of teaching and learning about technology and the use of technology. This is, can students use computers? Do they know why and how a computer works, at least with a basic understanding? Do they know how to find resources that are reliable? Those kinds of things really kind of play into that. And digital literacy, I really think, could be just like its whole own session. So I'm not going to dig too deeply into that, but we might do a follow-up on that at some other point. Security kind of goes back to that online safety. Are they taking precautions that guarantee their safety? Are they aware of what those precautions are? Do we kind of know how to be secure online before we get on there? Etiquette, that goes back again to like the professionalism. Are they engaging in a way that aligns with your student conduct policies? Some of these elements of digital citizenship you can kind of work into your classroom norms, into your class conduct policies. I think that when you bring light to these digital competencies, that it can really help students to frame their thoughts when they're engaging online. Rights and responsibilities, that kind of talks again closer to the law part, but rights and responsibilities talks a little bit more about freedom. What are you free to do in a digital world? How does the freedom that we experience in society translate? How is it different? Those kinds of things can kind of be a really great conversation to have with your students around their rights and responsibilities when they're engaging online. And then health and wellness, I think, is something that we've probably all kind of emphasized a lot the past few months with some of the stress that has been happening. But this is basically just making sure that your physical being, your mental being, your emotional being are all being taken care of while you engage in this digital world. Because as we all know, it can be exhausting and it can be frustrating if you have people who aren't being professional and aren't thinking conscientiously about how they're engaging. They aren't considering these 9 elements of digital citizenship. So anytime that we can provide our students with these tools, they'll be able to recognize when somebody is not engaging in a way that aligns with digital citizenship best practices. And then it can help for them to kind of stop that narrative. If they see somebody who's engaging that way, they'll know that they don't want to engage that way because it doesn't align with some of these best practices. Okay, so this is another page that has some resources on digital citizenship. I will say that there are a lot of resources about digital citizenship, whether you're looking for a lesson to teach, or you're looking for information to help yourself, or you're looking for information to help your students understand this concept. Common Sense Media has a really phenomenal digital citizenship page. It's loaded with lesson plans, with resources, with infographics, all kinds of things that you could use to kind of have that conversation with your students and integrate these themes into what you're already doing. And then we have establishing digital citizenship in the classroom, in the digital classroom. This one specifically talks about like online learning and how digital citizenship can be incorporated into a digital classroom versus the face-to-face classroom. And then the third one is the modeling of the use of digital citizenship in the classroom. I really like that resource because it's kind of from the teacher perspective of how you might actually just model these things versus, having that direct instruction. You're kind of leading by example, is how that resource kind of works. So I'm going to, we'll watch a quick clip. It's about a minute. From this video. This is, his name is Richard Collada. He is from ISTE. He's one of the, I don't know if he's like a CEO or what. He's a prominent person at ISTE. And he talks a little bit about digital citizenship and some of the misnomers, and then gets a little bit more into like what we can do with digital citizenship. So I'm gonna play this, and we're gonna just watch like a clip of it because I don't want to watch the whole thing, or I don't want to have you watch the whole thing. I've watched the whole thing. And then if you want to dig more deeply into this, hopefully it's going to play. Oh, I'm clicking the wrong one. If you want to dig more deeply into this, when you get the slide deck, you're more than welcome to watch the whole video. It's about 11 minutes. It's really great stuff. I just wanted to pull out kind of the piece that I feel is most important to this conversation. So.
Emma, we don't have audio.
I was really hoping that that just worked well and that, okay, I might have to, 1 second. I'm glad you said something because I'm sitting here like, oh good, nobody said anything. It must be going well. Like, nope, my bad. Okay, 1 sec. I have to include, yeah, share computer sound. I didn't have that clicked. My bad. So I guess I'll have to restart because you didn't even hear all the good stuff you said.
First, I want to take a minute and share something.
Okay, now you can hear it?
Now, digital citizenship, I will say, is the only element that is mentioned in the student, teacher, and leader standards. So apparently we think it's important enough to have it show up in all three. Now, usually when I'm visiting a school, people will tell me that digital citizenship is being taught in their school. But when I ask what they teach, they usually say things like, well, we make sure kids know not to post inappropriate pictures online. Or we make sure they know how to make strong passwords. Those are important things. I don't want kids posting inappropriate pictures online, but that's not digital citizenship. That's online safety. And online safety is not the same as digital citizenship. Digital citizenship is about using technology to make your community better, to respectfully engage with people who have different beliefs from yours, to be able to shape and change public policy, to be able to recognize the validity of online sources of information.
Wow, it's like I knew it's like it knew I wanted to stop there. I did not hit stop. It's not actually, hang on. It's not where I wanted to stop it. Why did it stop?
They usually, those are to respectfully engage with people, to be able to recognize the validity of online sources of information. Digital citizenship, it turns out, is not a list of don'ts, but a list of do's.
Okay, so we almost got it the first time. So I really appreciate his framing of digital citizenship in this video because I think that it's really often that digital citizenship is confused with online safety. They are related, but they're not mutually exclusive. They're not the same thing. So while being safe online is very important, it is not engaging as a digital citizenship, engaging as a digital citizen necessarily. It might be, but it's not always. They're not mutually exclusive. So the do's of digital citizenship. I think that this is where we can, as instructors, find power in digital citizenship. These are the places where we can really empower our students to be independent learners, to engage with their community, to really feel confident in the digital world. And so these categories are kind of broad and they're kind of meant to be that way so that you can kind of think about how you, like, what are you already doing with students that has them engaging in these things, and what might you do? What, is there something that you're doing that you could, level up somehow and have it be a do of digital citizenship that you're having your students engage in? And so I would like to have us just pause for a few minutes and think about how we might integrate the do's of digital citizenship into learning experiences. And so this will bring you, there's the link that John is going to drop into the chat, or you can scan the QR code here. This will take you to a Padlet, which I will pull up in just a moment. And I'm hoping that you could pick one of these or multiple if you're feeling ambitious, but hopefully at least one, and think about an activity that you're either doing with your learners or have done, or something that you'd like to do with them that would fall into one of these categories of a do of digital citizenship. It could be something that you need to translate slightly because you've done it in person in the past and you'd like to do it remotely now. And so the possibilities are kind of endless with this. I'm not going to try to put too many constraints on it, but I'll pull up the Padlet and I'll pause for just a couple minutes here and we'll try to do some brainstorming on how we might integrate these do's of digital citizenship. You see the Padlet, right?
Yes.
As I say, I didn't hear any no's, so I was hoping it was a yes. I'm just kind of taking a moment while you're doing this to look back at the chat, and I see a great question from Mark about, would access also include advocating for universal internet connectivity for students and families? My answer to that is absolutely. Access in any way to their learning experiences and the digital world for sure. Seeing some great stuff popping up here. I love these interactive things where you can kind of see as people are brainstorming and thinking. Okay, and you'll have access to this Padlet too after this session. The link to it will still be in the PowerPoint, and I will keep this Padlet up for a while. So if you want to kind of go through and see what others have put in here as well, then you are more than welcome to do that and kind of see how it builds. We will also be offering this Padlet out to the asynchronous people who connect, so it will kind of slowly keep building. So I think it ought to get interesting as time goes on. Okay, so online safety and digital citizenship are kind of I don't want to say simple because it can be complex, but the overall picture of them is very simple. We know how to be safe and we know how to engage as citizens in the real world. So the real difference is just translating that to the virtual world. One of the examples I like to use is that, we teach kids that, you don't take candy from strangers. And I think that that example can translate online. Somebody writes to you and they're like, hey, click on this link for, a free toy or whatever it is. Those kinds of things can really help to making those connections between what kind of an experience you might have in an in-person environment and what kind of an experience you could have in a virtual environment, but how those relate to each other. I think that can be very powerful. They're not totally different concepts. They're very similar. So emphasizing that idea that, like, all right, students, we all know, what the expectations are of, interacting with each other in the classroom. So how does this look online? Another thing that I always like to recommend is including students in this process of kind of establishing what digital citizenship and online safety looks like in your remote learning. Students are almost always more engaged when they are part of the decision-making process. So if you kind of include them and ask them, what do you think we should do to make sure that everyone is, we're engaging as the best digital citizens that we can. You'd probably be surprised at some of the ideas that they would come up with, especially young folks now, because of course they've already been engaging online for quite a while. So they might have some insight that, that we might not have even thought of. So we're gonna leave a little bit of room at the end for kind of just discussion, questions, things of that nature. But this is kind of what I would consider your online safety and digital citizenship checklist. If you are doing these things as often as possible, as much as possible, then you're doing a great job. And I think that this is how we kind of move the needle as far as like understanding that digital citizenship isn't its own thing. It's very much a part of your class and your classroom and how your students engage with one another and you, as well as how they're representing their classroom when they're not in the classroom. Because just as you might go over, your expectations when students are on a field trip, like we're going to the museum, you're not going to do this, that, and this, it's the same idea. I've seen one thing that I really like is Twitter chats, because they are open to the world. So kind of setting your expectations about what your students are how they'll engage in Twitter kind of helps to, it's almost like setting them free on the world. So you have to set your expectations before they get out there, because once they get out there, it can be a little bit harder to manage. And so I always think about that kind of like field trips. Like if you're going on a virtual field trip to a different, world, so to say, then you might want to kind of cover, okay, these are the expectations that I'm requiring of you. Or, if you're going to interact with a different classroom virtually, you might kind of talk about those kinds of things. Okay, that we're representing our class here. We want to make sure that we're, doing this, that, and the other to make sure that our class reputation, so to say, is kind of upheld. So I think anytime that you can include the students in that process, you'll have more success. So emphasize the do's of digital citizenship. Don't focus on the fear. Being safe online is very important, but we want to focus on increasing the citizenship part of engagement. We want our students to be effective citizens, even if that is in a digital world versus the face-to-face world. Create lessons that integrate the concepts of digital citizenship. It doesn't need to be its own lesson. It doesn't need to be its own focus. Just think about these elements, think about the themes, and try to integrate them into what you're already doing. If you're going to talk about, a history lesson, then you might talk a little bit about the different ways that, people, there's all sorts of different things. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but think about those 9 elements of digital citizenship and the 9 key P's of online safety. And anytime that you could kind of just bring one of those into an already existing lesson, you know, if you've already framed it with your students, like these are the things you want to keep in mind with digital citizenship and online safety, then when you reference to it in a different lesson, it helps them to make those connections that, oh yeah, we're being digital citizens right now. Like it doesn't have to be its own, like, okay, now I'm going to be a digital citizen because we're talking about digital citizenship. No, this is like an expectation at all times type of deal. So anytime we can integrate that into what we're doing is really phenomenal. Regularly discussing online safety with students, I think, is a really great practice. Things change so fast. So you can kind of have that conversation once, but the world changes right after you have that conversation. So I think re-emphasizing those things, this is how we stay safe online, this is how we protect our information, you know, modeling that can be a really great method to reinforce it. You know, you can kind of talk through what you're doing or how you're protecting yourself or how you're engaging online safely. I think just developing that narrative, like if you're walking students through like a Google search to find a resource, you know, you would have that internal narrative of, oh, I'm not going to click on that because that's a sponsored ad and that's not where I want to go or whatever. But if you externalize that and you're verbalizing it while you're talking with your students, then they can help see the process that you're going through while you're doing things, and then they can kind of develop that process themselves. I kind of talked about this a minute ago. You want to use the themes of digital citizenship to empower your students to be confident digital learners. Digital citizenship is not like I would refrain from using it for like reprimanding or things of that nature. I would use it to empower your students. Like use these things to be an effective digital citizen. You know, incorporate these into your learning, incorporate them into all of the things that you're doing so that they feel more confident in their use of technology and their own safety as well. You know, with the awareness of online safety, I think comes hand in hand that confidence to engage as an online learner, because then you kind of you're like, oh, I don't know if I should click on that link, you know, and if you've kind of gone over that, it's like, no, I'm not clicking on that link, like, no way. So you could kind of like work through that to create confidence and empower your students. And then you want to incorporate online safety and digital citizenship into your classroom norms, your conduct policies, your expectations, all of those kinds of things. Anytime that you can just integrate that into it, you know, you have a class conduct of what you expect your students to do, like in person, and what you expect them not to do. So the same thing can be said for the digital world. So if you keep the 9 key Ps and the 9 elements of digital citizenship in mind when you're kind of looking at your classroom norms, if you already have, you know, like already have one established and you really love it, then look at it through the lens of digital citizenship and think about how you might either adjust language that kind of emphasizes that we're talking about a digital world as well. There's all sorts of things that you could do to kind of establish that into some of your norms and expectations. And tomorrow, it's hard to believe that it's tomorrow we're going to have a session on classroom norms. So we'll probably talk a little bit about the digital citizenship and online safety component that can play into remote learning when you're establishing these things as well tomorrow. So if you'd like to dive deeper into that, feel free to join us. Okay, so this brings us to the point where I would love to just open the floor if anyone has any questions about anything we've talked about or anything related or ideas that they want to throw out, something awesome that they're already doing that aligns with this, anything like that. Hopefully somebody wants to be brave.
Can I talk, Emma?
Yes, you can.
Okay, I didn't want to just start. I think over the years, I've found that as with digital citizenship, if you can have a common language, especially if the kids have more than one teacher, I know K2, like they might just have one central teacher that they have, but as you get older and the kids see multiple teachers, it really does help to have common language around digital citizenship so that they are continuing to hear and see similar behaviors and similar comments and approaches to digital citizenship in common ways within your community. so that if there is an issue, things can be addressed with similar language so that it can go back to those common sense media lessons that you might have done. But I think too often we teach digital citizenship in a vacuum, and we expect one person to teach it when the rest of us don't hear the language. And I would just say, if you're going to do something, connect with your teams or with other people that the kids have, because if the kids are hearing, we know this, right? Prior knowledge pulls through for them. And if they can tap that from teacher to teacher, from class to class, and they're hearing a similar message, that's huge. The other part is we as teachers need to model and do these things as well. So we need to maybe teach ourselves some things sometimes too around digital citizenship and model those things in our own teaching with the resources that we use and how we cite things and how we allow these opportunities for students to speak to each other and give them opportunities as well. I hope that makes sense.
Jen, I was glad that you were joining our call because I knew you have some strong thoughts on this. So when we first started doing digital learning sessions, offerings through the DOE, I think one of the things that I really liked that you had said was kind of, this is why we do digital citizenship stuff. Like, if people weren't on board with how that needs to be embedded in our curriculum, this should get them on board with it now. So hopefully people are, if they kind of struggled with understanding why we should be focusing so much time on digital citizenship and digital literacy and embedding those into what we're doing all the time, hopefully those people kind of are seeing, all right, this is why we need to do that.
Yeah,
and I think in a
remote
remote learning environment, it's so important.
And it's a heavy lift, but you don't have to do it alone, that we have communities that can do it together, and we can tap parents to help as well. And, seeing Facebook, I know that they will benefit from learning what it means to be a digital citizen as well.
I love the idea of using a united front, like having other teachers that are on board, and that, there's that common language. People are, okay, this is what I'm doing in my class to emphasize digital citizenship and, those kinds of concepts, and being able to scaffold that, if you're talking with, even the younger grades, and then you can move that progression, then you can kind of see, okay, these are the concepts and the level that they talked about it in K-12, K2, and then 3-5, we're gonna move up a little bit and talk about it at this level, and then you can kind of move through the scaffold as they get older and kind of introduce the more complex concepts to them as they're ready for them.
And I had put in the chat, but I just kind of want to make the point that sometimes we have to be reactive to what's going on in the world, and you can kind of leverage things that are happening in the world, because when you start to have those conversations, kids will be immediately interested if there's something that's happened. I was thinking personally, when I don't know if you remember the Momo challenge of a few years ago, but I just had so many students that were just concerned about that, and parents had contacted the school. So there was just kind of this building tension around that. And it was like, yeah, we're going to have some classroom discussions about this, but we can pair it with talking about larger digital citizenship issues and just kind of fake news and looking at different resources out there. And kids were, once they knew that's what we were going to be talking about, they were all in, like they were totally interested. So it's like those topics, those current events that can come up, sometimes they can seem a little intimidating because they're developing. But instead of shying away from those, I think sometimes we can really meet those, and it's going to engage students, and you can have really deeper discussions, often much deeper discussions than you might initially think, as somebody who's working at the elementary level.
I think it also comes into play when we think about kids who aren't using technology properly, that having gone to a distance learning model, we can't take their devices away. It is their pencil. now, right? So we need to have a conversation about, like, we need to have restorative conversations about why it's important to be a part of a community and how we act when we're a part of a community and how others are impacted by the way that we act when we're on these things. So instead of us, turning off email when they send emails that they shouldn't, or when they open docs and have like conversations that they shouldn't. I mean, there are fourth graders, third graders with email and with docs now, but having those bigger conversations about what it means to be a member of a community will hopefully get them to realize that later on in life, your email gets shut off, but you can open another one. So you still need to learn how to act.
And to some extent, we're doing them a disservice if we're just, if we're turning off chats, we're turning off email. I mean, at what point do we let them kind of learn how to do that appropriately? And I think that's why setting those norms, which we'll be talking about tomorrow, I think that's why that's so important. And just kind of like setting norms within your classroom is so important to kind of do that at the beginning of the year, try to pull students into those conversations. But we'll get to that tomorrow.
I think that's a really great point, though, that idea that, we're kind of, if we take things like that away instead of using it as a learning opportunity, then we're kind of robbing students of that ability to kind of learn what the appropriate behavior is for, digital citizenship. Just like if a student misbehaves in your classroom, you're going to sit down and talk with them about like what they did was not acceptable, how they might act next time, and why it was, not acceptable. So it's kind of that same exact idea. I love that you brought that up, Jen, because you can't just take the device away anymore. And I feel like that is a go-to for a lot of people. Oh, you're done. Like it's over. And like, that's easy for us, but it does do them a disservice because they're going to do it again. And they won't know why they shouldn't have done it again because it was never really fully explained to them. So that's phenomenal. Anybody else have any thoughts that they want to contribute? Can be totally separate from this, doesn't have to follow along the same theme or anything.
We did have a comment in the chat about using TikToks to talk about inappropriate behavior, which I think is a nice model. Again, I think it's one of those things that kids are going to be on different platforms, whether it's TikTok or Snapchat or something like that. And I think addressing those is really important, and they're going to be more engaged if you're able to pull those things in. And as long as you can kind of keep things appropriate and keep the conversation meaningful and focused, I think that's so important. So we've shifted from writing notes and passing them around the classroom, although I'm sure that still happens, to that sort of stuff happening in a digital medium. And how can we kind of address those things within the digital classroom?
I think we also have an opportunity to show them some amazing things that kids are doing, like kids their age and how they're using technology. Like one of the examples is LiveBits. Have you heard of LiveBits? She actually lives in New Hampshire, but she's gone to like ISTE and national conferences now. She shares her bullying experience, and now she goes online and does like little learning tidbits. And she's gotten national recognition for it. So like there's kids that are doing things that are amazing and changing the world in positive ways. And I think we need to like make sure that we highlight and lift up Kid President and all those other ones that are doing amazing things as well, and ways to share. If we can show kids ways to share and ways to learn and ways to grow, we know they know YouTube, but how are they using YouTube to learn how to do crafts, to learn how to do things and to teach themselves? So we have an amazing, amazing group of kids in Maine that are doing wonderful things, and how might we promote those things and not just show the negative things that kids could do and why they shouldn't do them.
It's all about that empowerment, right? Anyone else? We've got a few more minutes, and then I'll switch the slide over to our PD certificate stuff.
And in the chat, Philip mentioned about students like wanting people to look at their YouTube channels and stuff like that. So I mean, that's a great example. And I know my own kids, I have a 5th grader and a 6th grader, and they're both kind of like, hey, can we, maybe this summer spend some time learning about doing better video production? Because they've grabbed a camera and done some really basic stuff, but they want to like learn more. And I think that's a good opportunity to have, larger conversations about not just the technical how to do that, but how to do that responsibly and how to share that responsibly and, try to keep yourself safe and all those aspects. So I think that's a nice example, and certainly something we have so many students out there that have YouTube channels or are developing them or want to be a YouTuber when they grow up. And I think it, again, one of those things, it's important not to just shy away from that because it seems, trendy or potentially, there are potential challenges or dangers in going down that path. But I think something that you got to figure out how to tackle that, because that it's going to captivate them in a way that other topics wouldn't.
Yeah, anytime we can meet our students where they're already interested, I feel like it's a win, because you don't have to fight them to get them interested. They're already there. So it's like, oh, you like TikTok. Okay, how can we use that? Or, oh, you're a YouTube star. How can we leverage that? Those kinds of things I think can make all the difference, because then instead of trying to get that buy-in, they already have the buy-in. You just have to get on board with it. Makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left. So I'm just going to pull this up. This is the PD certificate completion for this session. Once you fill out the quick form, you'll submit your response, and then it will say thank you, and it'll give you a link to click on your certificate right there. You fill in your name, and then you can print or download it right there on the spot. And thank you all so much for joining us. We will be doing this again tomorrow, talking about classroom norms. And then in the afternoon, we have a 3 p.m. session. It's going to be a help session talking about troubleshooting and strategizing using Flipgrid and Padlet. So if you're interested in talking a little bit about it, or if you have something that you're doing that's fantastic in Flipgrid or Padlet, please feel free to come and show people. So that'll be at 3 p.m. tomorrow, and the classroom norms will be at 11 a.m. And the slide deck that I emailed to everyone will have the full schedule of June PD that John and I will be offering. So if you kind of want to dig into what we might be offering, that's a really great way to do it. And all of the Remote Learning 101 pieces will be recorded and posted for asynchronous viewing as well. So if you want to, watch through again, or you can't make it, or you have to be late, or whatever the case ends up being, within about a week, you should be able to see those on the DOE webpage. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.